We're going to begin today on that Liberal caucus meeting. We're learning more and more about what went down behind closed doors, including a deadline for Justin Trudeau to decide if he'll stay on as Liberal leader. Here to help bring us up to speed is CBC News chief political correspondent Rosemary Barton and Catherine Cullen, host of the CBC political podcast, The House. Thank you. It feels like only a few hours we were doing this. Catherine, let's start with the latest details we have about how this went down inside the room. We hear Patrick Weiler got things started. What do you know?
Yeah, well, in fact, the Prime Minister really got things started, David. According to sources, and we've all been speaking to folks who were inside the room, told his MPs this has been such a difficult time. He actually got emotional talking to MPs about the F Trudeau flags and the impact that's having on his children, saying, you know, it's their last name too. Spoke about the need for party unity, saying that Liberals lose when they're not united. So sort of made that push. Then it was time for him to listen. As you say, our sources tell us that the first MP up to the mic was Vancouver MP Patrick Weiler. He read this letter aloud that we've been hearing so much about, the letter that says it's time, Prime Minister, for you to go, and setting a deadline, too, saying that by Monday, the Prime Minister has to decide what he is going to do. They were told that the letter was signed by 24 people. MPs did not get a copy of that letter, and in fact, we still don't know, and members of caucus don't know exactly who signed it, although some names have become public. Now, it didn't end with the letter signers, from what we understand. There's different estimates that we're getting from folks somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 MPs, perhaps more, got up and said it is time for the Prime Minister to go. There were others who stood up and defended the Prime Minister, although from what we're told, a smaller number. One MP said to me that the Prime Minister was told repeatedly, "You are the problem. People don't want to hear from you anymore." And this MP said, you know, people pressing on that button over and over and over, it must have been bone-shattering for the Prime Minister to hear. Now, we have heard generally that the conversation was respectful, but obviously a difficult one, and that when the meeting wrapped, Trudeau spoke again. He said he's going to reflect, he's going to listen, but his inclination is to stay.
Okay. Rosie, it's interesting that when I spoke to someone who said when Patrick Weiler got up and read out the letter, it was like the end of Scooby-Doo when the mask comes off. You see who's behind it all, right? It was that sort of a reveal for them. I mean, what is the Prime Minister's office saying now? What are his people saying now? What do you think they're going to do after they've been confronted with this today?
It's a little bit unclear at this stage. I would say the first thing is that there was some surprise at the number of people who were expressing frustrations. It is surprising to me that that would have been a surprise, but nonetheless, that is the truth. I think that they were very hung up on the fact that the letter that circulated did not have names attached to it, because as you've been reporting, it wasn't clear that that was going to happen today. I think they took some comfort in that there are people still not willing to publicly say what they are willing to put on paper and demand on paper. It's not clear to me how or if they will respond by Monday. I suppose some sort of response is needed. But given that, as Catherine rightly points out, this is a deadline as opposed to a clear threat or ultimatum, I think it is hard for the Prime Minister's office to respond and hard to know how this group of people will respond too. If the Prime Minister comes back and says, I'm staying, and here are some of the things that we're willing to do, is that enough to convince these people to down tools? I honestly don't know. And from what you guys have been saying to me as well, it's very, very unclear what next steps are.
Well, in fact, what we're hearing, David, is that they really have not decided that while they're asking the Prime Minister to reflect, the people behind this letter have some reflecting to do as well to decide how far they're willing to go. I know a lot of people were listening yesterday when Ken McDonald was on this program and raised, you know, the specter of a non-confidence motion. People are saying, wow, that's a nuclear option that really is not going to work for so many of us. But there are other measures in between, right? Do they make their names public? Do they hold a news conference? Do they sit as independents? There's a lot of room to maneuver here. They are thinking about that while they are asking the Prime Minister to take this time and reflect.
Yeah, I mean, the letters, I mean, this letter with the signatures is sort of like this contract between the MPs to agree to work together towards the goal of forcing a change in leadership. That's sort of binding them together. And what was released to caucus is where the position eventually evolved to, because there's no October 28th date on the initial document that they're signing, as I understand it. Patrick Weiler just emailed me back as the guy who read this letter and got things going, says he's not going to comment on what is said in caucus as is confidential, other than to say that this is the most honest and frank caucus discussion that I have ever had. I think it's time for the Prime Minister and for caucus members to take some time to reflect on everything that was said in the 3+ hour meeting. Other people spoke today. Sophie Chattel, the Quebec Liberal MP for Pontiac, part of the effort to collect signatures. She was one of the people, I'm told, getting people to sign the piece of paper at various points throughout the process. We heard from Yvonne Baker in there today, apparently, and also people like George Chahal, Anthony Housefather. Less clear to me if they're signed on to that, because some people who signed the letter spoke, not everyone who signed the letter spoke, and people who didn't sign the letter spoke. So we're not really at a much greater path of clarity, are we?
This is the thing. We don't really know what the number is. It seems clear that there were people who spoke out who hadn't signed the letter, but given that caucus hasn't seen the signatures that go along with it, they don't really have a sense, I think, necessarily of what the level of support is. But my sense from speaking to people who were in that room is that it did surprise people. I mean, it feels like perhaps a more substantial number, given what they perceive as the combination of the two groups than they expect.
There are people, though, I should say, who are supportive of the Prime Minister, who believe that this airing of grievances, as you said earlier today, was important, it was helpful, that it was healthy. They also believe now that it's over, because they still think that the majority of people largely, broadly support the Prime Minister, and they don't know where this goes next, for all the reasons that we've talked about, not only because they don't know their strategy, but because there isn't anyone else who's waiting in the wings to take over this job. I mean, there are people, they're just not ready to go right away.
Right. And I think there's an interesting question about whether there is a path forward for the Prime Minister and the PMO here in trying to deal with some of the core issues still at this point. I mean, we talked a lot about it in a special earlier today, this question of ads against Pierre Poilievre, a timeline, an amount in an ad buy, because MPs have been hearing for what some say amounts to years that something is coming, right? So is there laying out a clearer plan, a path that would satisfy a greater component of caucus, or how big ultimately is this movement behind the letter?
Right. It's interesting, Rosie. You heard some people say that they think it is over, because I think there's been an underestimating of either side of this. Like, I think people I've spoken with close to the Prime Minister and the PMO leading up to this thought the number was smaller than the 24, like 12 to 15 is what they thought. And the dissidents believed they had a much larger number, and we saw maybe a little bit that they may have had a better sense of the discontent with what played out in caucus today. But my sense from speaking to the people who marshaled the letter, they see today as the beginning of the process, not the end of the process. And once they get the answer by Monday, assuming the Prime Minister lives up to the deadline, because he did promise to reflect on it, there's a whole other series of decisions and individual actions that may have to be taken then, because there's no collective ultimatum of do this or else. They're going to see what he says and then reconvene and figure out what they're going to do.
Yeah, and let's be clear, the most damaging outcome, if the Prime Minister is going to stay, and it certainly appears that that's where his head is still at, is that this group, or a smaller or a larger group, says, well, we're not going to stay in the party. Yeah. That then becomes a very public humiliation, a very clear sign of a divide, and no way to come back from that. It does not sound today like that is on the table either. So, but that's the kind of bar I think we would be looking for, either, as you said, the confidence vote issue or leaving caucus altogether. That would be the kind of thing I think that would force him to take action. And right now, I don't know that whether we're closer to that idea or not.
Yeah, and just a few more details. When Patrick Weiler rose to speak, I'm told by multiple people inside the room that he said we have a very good record as a government. We've done a lot of good things. People are starting to sense entitlement, though, and entitlement is what defeat Liberals. And talked about the need for a leadership change for the Liberals, comparing to what's happened with the Democrats in the United States, referencing Joe Biden's decision to step aside, saying they could get a jolt of energy like that. That could be wishful thinking, but that is what was said.
Kamala Harris could well lose the election, is what I would say to Liberals, that it's pretty neck and neck at this stage. So again, how well thought out this strategy is, I'm not sure. That would be a risk. Maybe a risk that many Liberals believe is worth taking, but it would be one for sure.
Okay. Last word, or we good? Okay. All right. We'll leave it there. We're going to keep talking about this. I think
so many words
in the days and weeks. Yeah, we've had a day. All right. Our chief political correspondent Rosemary Barton and Catherine Cullen, hosts of the CBC Political Podcast, The House. Thank you both. Great working with you all day today. Well, the Prime Minister heard today from concerned and frustrated Liberal MPs, some who think his leadership has become a problem for the party. Although their caucus meeting was behind closed doors, MPs emerged to give their own take on how that conversation unfolded.
A lot of listening, a lot of frank and open conversation. It was the first time that we discussed this, and that was really important. I believe I was heard, and I think the rest is to be determined.
Prime Minister will make a decision, and he will, whatever the decision is, we will stand behind him.
Whether or not to stay or go,
That's going to be always been his decision, nobody else's.
For myself, it was an important opportunity to reflect on important issues facing our country and how we can work together to make sure we defeat the Conservatives.
It was respectful. A lot of people spoke their minds. I think the key thing is that we heard a lot. Over, I say 50 or so people angle every aspect of this. And what it's left us with is something to go away and think about.
I think he's the Prime Minister, and I respect him, and decisions, and all of the decisions are his to be made, and the most important and fundamental decision of a leader is when to stay on and when to decide to throw in the towel, and that decision is rightly for him to make.
It was important to have important discussions, what we hear from constituents, and I think what was said in the caucus should stay in the caucus.
The Prime Minister has to listen to the frustrations, and in some cases really valid frustrations of caucus colleagues, and incorporate that into changes moving forward, whether those are big changes or small changes or both. And the second thing is my colleagues need to turn the knives outwards and not inwards, and we need to focus on the most important thing, which is getting things done here in Parliament and taking the fight to Pierre Poilievre, because he's a disaster for this country.
It's the decision of the leader of the party as to whether he stays on as leader. So that is Mr. Trudeau's decision. I think our caucus is united on a path forward to make sure we're addressing the needs of Canadians and stopping Pierre Poilievre.
I think the caucus recognizes that we have to stay united and that we can't fall prey to the fear-mongering. And listen, the other guys, they can smell blood, they can smell fear. We can't let that be the case because we got to stand strong.
Okay, that last voice, that person you saw there, that was Charles Sousa, Liberal MP for Mississauga Lakeshore here in Ontario, and he joins me now in the studio. Mr. Sousa, thanks for coming in. We appreciate you.
Thank you, David. Good to be here.
I want to start. Where specifically do you stand on Justin Trudeau as leader of the Liberal Party?
Well, he's the leader of the party, and we're having a great conversation about the dynamics that's facing us across the country, and recognizing that there are some concerns that people are sharing with him, and he's taking everything under advisement, as he should. And in fact, it's important to have those open discussions. But I believe Justin Trudeau is the man that we are going to have in the next coming election, and I stand by him.
Okay, so you think he's the right choice? You think he's the best choice? There's no doubt in your mind as an MP is running again?
I reflect on what has happened in previous elections that I've participated in, where we've had these issues. When Dalton McGuinty faced a decision, he made his decision without members of his caucus forcing him. Mm-hmm. That's important because it can maintain unity as we move forward into the selection of a new leader. And she became, Kathleen Wynne, won a majority thereafter.
Right.
The similarities that I'm seeing, however, is the moment you start to make those challenges open and out there in the public, you're already conceding defeat. You're already creating a sense of unwillingness to stand together. And the Prime Minister today made it very clear that he is standing by the party. He is standing with his caucus. And everyone in that caucus and everyone who spoke has the opportunity and his encouragement to remain, because what he wants is a united front.
Right. He's not going to kick anybody out. No one's going to be disciplined from this. Is certainly the impression I have. Is that the impression you got from caucus today? Okay. You did not sign the letter?
No, I did not.
Okay. Were you surprised to learn that 24 people had and others agreed with them whether they'd signed it or not?
Well, my concern here is the discussions that are being made are welcome. The fact that it's being discussed publicly isn't appropriate, because then there are those who are not privy to some of those discussions that are unsure as to what has taken place. So that's the part that concerns me, and I'm hopeful that people will respect the privacy of those that are participating on all sides. And I believe that the caucus, and even after today's discussions, will stand united and will stand strong and will respect the decision that the Prime Minister makes.
You're probably going to tell me you're not going to violate caucus confidentiality, so I expect that answer, but I'm going to ask the question anyway. Patrick Weiler got up, read the letter, issued the demand, said they want an answer by October 28th. Others like Sophie Chattel, Yvonne Baker got up and supported it. They are now being revealed as the people who were behind this effort, part of this effort, and signatories to the letter. What do you have to say to that?
I'll say this. The real challenge, the person that the Prime Minister is fighting against, and all of us, is, and why we're doing what we do, is to support the Canadians, support Canadians across the country. And Pierre Poilievre is enjoying this opportunity to promote fear and to do his gimmicks and to give doubt in people's mind. They use that same playbook in 2018 against Kathleen Wynne. We cannot allow that to happen. We cannot feed this beast who's going to take advantage of creating divisiveness across the country and within our caucus. We have to stand strong. And the Prime Minister and all those that spoke are being respected, as well as all those that haven't really had an opportunity to express themselves. But the Prime Minister is listening, and he is acutely aware of what's taking place. He's also well aware of the real threat. And the real threat is the fact that we have an individual that's wanting to become Prime Minister, who hasn't taken security clearance, who hasn't taken the steps to inform himself of what the economic structure is. I mean, it is really childish play that he's doing. And one of the reasons I came back is because I heard him speak at the Economic Club or Canadian Club in Toronto, talking about quantitative easing and monetary policy, which he knew nothing about. Mm-hmm. But he was trying to deflect the Bitcoin discussion. And his engagement to engage with the governor of the Bank of Canada, overstep those issues that are important for arm's length activities, is dangerous. Right now, economic recovery is strong. We're leading the G7 in that recovery. Inflation's coming down, interest rates are coming down, social programs are introduced and being sustained. I think that's what Canadians really care about. And I'm very, very confident that the Prime Minister cares about them more than he cares about himself, unlike Pierre Poilievre.
Right, but those three MPs who stood up today, starting with Mr. Weiler, we know also Ken McDonald, Sean Casey, and Wayne Long, who have identified themselves as signatories to the letter. That's 6 of the 24. They didn't give all of the names in there. What do you make of the fact that they sort of force this issue, say there's 24 of them, but they won't reveal themselves to a caucus that by all accounts was willing to hear from them today without consequence, that there are still people who have put pen to paper saying we want to get rid of the leader, but they won't stand up in the caucus and say, I'm part of this?
I think what they're saying is we want the leader to listen to the concerns that some members of the caucus may have, as do many across the country, given what we've seen in polling, but also saying we need to ensure that we take the necessary steps to win and protect Canadians as we go forward. And the fact that people are speaking out doesn't deny the Prime Minister or the leader of being forcing a decision. I mean, there's no ultimatum here.
There's a deadline, right?
But that doesn't mean that they're going to do anything. That means they want to ensure that we have the time necessary to make appropriate changes to our campaign and our structure, and to start framing the story. Right now, the story is that Pierre Poilievre is dictating how we're going. We can't let that be. But we cannot allow the party to concede defeat by way of creating a division within our caucus when it doesn't really exist. There is no division. There are points of view that are being reflected upon.
But they didn't sign a letter saying we demand we start framing our story and building our narrative by October 28th. They signed a letter and read out a document today saying they want the Prime Minister to step down, right? I mean, this is not a narrative framing thing. So, look, my whole career is about hitting deadlines. If I miss a deadline, there's often a consequence. What do you think happens on October 28th? Because you got the block on the 29th. I mean, there's a lot of deadlines being delivered. What do you think happens if the Prime Minister doesn't announce he's leaving? What do you think these 24 do?
Well, I think what will happen is the Prime Minister will come to a decision, and I think he's already made it clear over the last number of months when people have been trying to question his desire to stay on. He sees himself, and many do as well, as the appropriate choice. There is There may be a number of others that may want to take on that position, but we've seen in past, and I think Rosie mentioned it just recently, that it still resulted in a loss when you don't have confidence in your leader and someone that hasn't had the opportunity to understand what's happening across the country. It's a tough job. It's a tough job that he's in. And between what's happening in world events and, of course, across the country, and with the upcoming election in the United States, we need someone strong, someone powerful, someone that's capable and can stand up to some of the issues that are before us. Justin Trudeau's proven himself to be that.
He did say to the caucus, I'm told, and others are told, that he still believes he is the right person to lead the party into the next election, and nothing he heard today completely convinced him otherwise, so that he would take this very seriously and think about it in the coming days, and also talked about the temptation of stepping down because of the toll this has on family and everything else. Because you're right, it is a hard job, and I think people who don't see it up close don't have any idea. Is there any doubt in your mind that he stays right now? Do you think what has happened today and what could happen in the coming days and maybe after the 28th that could change Justin Trudeau's position on this?
Yeah, I'm not in the inner circle here, but
you're good.
I've had some discussions with him personally, and he's made a few calls to a number of people over the course of the year or so. And I know that he is most concerned about the party and about Canada. He knows that so much onus is put on him as a leader. He knows that people are reflecting on him alone. But it's not just about him. But he recognizes that what's in the best interest for Canada is to have some degree of sustained and understanding of the role. I don't think Pierre Poilievre has that. And I'm not sure if anybody else can succeed him at this point under the short window that we have to do so. And he, I think, would like nothing more to have a bit of calm in his life. But the responsibility is huge, and he's assumed that responsibility, and he wants to deliver for Canadians more so than he wants to deliver for himself. This is not about him. It is about the best interests of Canada. Our fiscal track is strong. Our social programs are in place. We are heading forward to something more substantive, and he's fighting for future generations when it comes to the environment and the green economy and a number of other factors. I think people will come to appreciate and respect him for what he's been doing, and what's coming next is to ensure that Canada is on the right track. I'm not sure that Pierre Poilievre knows that.
Well, it was notable that you all emerged from a 3-hour caucus meeting primarily to talk about concerns over Justin Trudeau's leadership and the message discipline on what we're all united in is stopping Pierre Poilievre. It was a remarkable move to see everybody emerge and do that. But this is something that a lot of these MPs who have signed on to the letter and part of this effort want to do. They just feel the party is not taking the steps to do it, right? And that your promises in London last year, and then again in Nanaimo, and after St. Paul's, and here we are, it still isn't happening to their satisfaction, it seems. Is it happening to your satisfaction?
And it's encouraging that people are stepping up. It's encouraging that people are forcing and pushing the party to do better and to do more in terms of telling our story and expressing to Canadians where we're headed. That's important. I think that's part of the messaging that was brought forward today as well. So I'm all for that.
So one last question. My sense of the motivation of the 24, from talking to some of them, talking to people who are advising them, talking to people who have talked to them, it's not that they have a hate on for Justin Trudeau and dislike the Prime Minister personally. It's that they are being told flat out by their constituents, you've got a problem if he stays as leader. Is that how you would describe the way the discussion was, that the country isn't listening, as Sean Casey said, they've tuned out the Prime Minister, and it's going to take a change for them to open their ears to the Liberal message again? Or did you get a sense that you've got people who think he just has to go because he's been a bad Prime Minister? That's not my takeaway. What's your sense of it?
I'm a representative of my riding. I've been there for 4 or 5 different elections. I grew up in my community. People talk to me all the time. People express their concerns, and they also respect our decision. And one thing that Pierre Poilievre is banking on and fighting for is that he only needs like 35% to do what he needs to do. And he's going after the more extreme members of the community, and he's also telling people what he feels is Justin Trudeau as a brand, and they're buying it. And we have to be cautious about what it is.
So you're hearing it in your riding too?
I'm hearing my riding that they want something better. They do not want Pierre Poilievre. They're afraid of the man. And they want Justin Trudeau and they want the Liberal Party to succeed. They just want to make certain that we tell our story appropriately. I think the Prime Minister will do just that.
Were you surprised by what you heard today and what you saw and the number of MPs you saw doing it?
I appreciated what happened today. I didn't appreciate what happened prior in terms of having these leaks and not having these discussions in-house, because it's important for those that are participating to share that with the rest of us. The rest of it, we're all in it together. So
they did try to get caucus meetings and stuff this summer, right? And they said it could have been avoided.
I've had many discussions with many people throughout that course, and I am encouraged by it, and I thank all those that speak out. And I thank my constituents and those that tell me their concerns, and they want us to be positive. They don't want a divisive community, and they want our caucus and the Liberal Party to be strong. And I'm hopeful that that's exactly what's going to take place next.
Well, Charles Sousa, Ontario Liberal MP, we appreciate you coming on and speaking out and putting your face and your name behind it. We appreciate it. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
There were mixed messages as Liberal MPs streamed out of their 3-hour caucus meeting today, as cabinet ministers stood strong behind their leader, insisting Justin Trudeau is the person to take the Liberal Party into the next election, while some backbench MPs sounded less confident about the outcome of that meeting.
It's the decision of the leader of the party as to whether he stays on as leader. So that is Mr. Trudeau's decision.
It's not up to me. It's up to him. It's his decision.
We heard every angle, every aspect of this. And what it's left us with is something to go away and think about.
No, I don't feel like anything's changed personally for me.
How did it go?
Great.
What happened?
I think it's very important to the Prime Minister that he listens to the concerns and that there do have to be some changes.
I believe I was heard, and I think the rest is to be determined.
CBC News has confirmed that at least 24 Liberal MPs issued Trudeau a demand in that meeting, saying he must decide if he will step aside by Monday. So how should the Prime Minister respond to that deadline? Let's bring in the power panel on that. Jonathan Kalis is a former Quebec advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And here with me in the studio, Gary Keller is a former Chief of Staff to Conservative Ministers. Jordan Leichnitz is a former NDP strategist. And Sherelle Evelyn is the managing editor of The Hill Times, who I'm sure has had as busy a day as I have. Jonathan, let's start with you. There is this upstairs, downstairs, front bench, back bench kind of dynamic playing out, coming out of the caucus meeting. There's a lot of people dismissing the letter idea going into today. No one's doing that today. Where do you think the caucus is after what they heard?
Based on a lot of the comments we heard, even from some of the, well, I don't know who signed the letter, but some of the names we've heard of people at least who spoke in caucus today, some of the disgruntled MPs, you didn't really hear anybody else stand up in front of a camera and say the Prime Minister has to leave. I didn't hear anybody say that. I hear, you heard a lot of people saying, I felt heard. It's up to the Prime Minister to decide. He's the leader. We will follow him if he stays. So you didn't really hear this sort of, okay, well, we didn't feel heard. We're leaving. The disgruntled have a plan. And, one of the questions I had going into today, and I still don't have it answered, is what is it they want if he chooses to stay? And whatever the number is, and the number is 24, it's a couple more people who spoke but didn't sign the letter. The majority of caucus clearly seems to be comfortable with him staying on as leader and leading them into the next election. So those who are unhappy, what is it they're going to do? There's been recent reporting about a deadline next week, but what happens if that deadline comes and goes? There's no consequence, there's no threat. So maybe at that point they decide what they're going to do. But one of the things I did think, even though I wasn't sure how many people signed the letter, what was actually in the letter, is this seemed disorganized. It didn't seem like there was a real plan. So the question is, where do they go next? And I can't answer that. We don't know who all of them are, so we can't really ask them. But I think the majority of caucus and the message coming out of the meeting was, we have to move forward. We have to prepare and plan for an election that is coming, and we have to take on our opponent, not each other. And that, even from a Nate Erskine-Smith, he was very clear. There are policy issues. There are, even with the Bloc, but with the Conservatives, they need to focus on that.
Yeah, Nader Smith navigating that scrum without spilling a lidless cup of tea, by the way, as he came out of caucus, was a remarkable feat of agility. It was like a drinking game. But look, Gary, Patrick Weiler, we know, signed the letter because he stood up. He was the first to speak after the Prime Minister, and he's the one who read out the letter, the demand. He stepped down and put the October 28th date on the table, which is not something on the document the 24 signed, which was binding them to this effort. This was the public demand of that. About 20 people, 50 people spoke apparently in caucus, 20 give or take, said they think the Prime Minister should go. Not all of the 20 who said that were people who signed the letter. So there's the 24 and a little bit more. What they do, I don't know. The 28th is on the table. It sounds like we want to know what you've decided by then so that we can decide what we are going to do. Where do you think this leaves the Liberals?
Well, two things. One, on the Prime Minister's side. Look, if you don't have the support of your caucus, how can you go out to Canadians and say, I need your support at the next election? Because Pierre Poilievre is going to throw that back at him. He wants the support of Canadians in the next election. He can't even get 20% or more of his caucus to support him. Why should you vote for him? Why should he lead the Liberal Party? So that's a question that has to be answered ultimately by the Prime Minister and by the Cabinet and those who support him. On the flip side, look, this has been the weakest, slowest moving coup in Canadian parliamentary history that anyone has ever seen.
And your party knows coups, right? How to take out a leader.
You want to know a coup? Like, get it over with. This is just dragging on and on and on. And until it's disposed of, it's going to dominate Commons business, government business, parliamentary business, which goes back to the point that this is all Liberal infighting, that and the state's business and government business is not getting done. Now, the other problem for the Prime Minister with that list of 24, how many of the people were in that meeting today and said, look, I'm going to give him a chance. I'm going to give him an opportunity to make his case. I'm not happy, but I want to hear him say. And they went through that meeting and they stepped back out of that meeting saying, man, it's even worse than I thought. The guy is on Planet 9. Give me a pen. Where do I sign? It could get worse for him after this. And it's just going to continue to fester until there's some sort of end game here, and there is no end game, and that's the problem that everybody has, both on pro and con side in this.
Yeah, Jordan, some of the people who have now gotten to this point, and I will stress, it's only 24 of 153, but it is 24 MPs and others who spoke in support. They felt that they got to the point of calling for resignation because they couldn't get meetings after Toronto St. Paul's. They couldn't get the face-to-face they needed as a caucus to sort of keep it in the locker room. So it's spilled out as a result. What do you make of where things are?
Yeah, totally. I mean, some of this is also reaping a particular problem that is down to Trudeau's leadership style, where he doesn't have those close relationships in caucus that to fall back on in difficult times. And so I do think that probably that contributed to people not feeling heard. And that's not something that is new this year. That's over the entire duration of his leadership. But I think, you know, Gary makes some really good points here. This is ultimately a pretty weak group in terms of how they're coming together. The fact that people had to sign their names in secret and the names are not public, like this is not a group that feels themselves very bold. And I think the challenge is for any type of insurrection like this, if you come at the king, you better not miss, right? Mm-hmm. And because the worst of all worlds is when it trails on and there's no end, there's no conclusion to it. And that's really what the Liberals are staring down. And I think this provides a really big opening for Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, for voters who are not going to be voting Conservative, but who are tired of this kind of infighting from the Liberals. It allows Singh to go out and say, listen, like we're going to be here, we're going to be standing up against Conservative cuts, we're going to be defending the services you rely on, join us. And we're a place where you can leave that sort of infighting behind.
Yeah, purely by coincidence, he went out to the microphones in the House of Commons today with his whole caucus standing behind him. I wonder what message he was trying to convey. Sherelle, what's your sense of where things are in the backbench? You know, Gary says the performance today could have caused this to grow. There's some theory that the Prime Minister was pretty receptive and frank today, and maybe that could calm some people down. I think it's too early to tell. I don't know. What's your sense of where things stand?
Yeah, I think there's that idea of that we don't know, and it's still really unresolved. Yes, everybody came out for the most part saying, you know, we are united. What they are united on is wanting to beat Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. They are not united on how they are going to do that. They don't have a plan. They haven't yet heard the plan from, you know, the the center about, what's going to happen in the next campaign. They only just named a new campaign director. So where do we go from here? They've put this October 28th deadline on the table and said, tell us by this date or else. And it's a big or else what? I mean, unless this is the thing that everybody is deciding to play close to the vest, because they've leaked everything else about what it is that's going on. So unless they do have some sense of what they're going to do come Monday, and they've just decided that no, this is the part that we're going to keep quiet, and we're going to drop the big bomb on the 29th or the 30th. If Trudeau decides not to go, they've had months, if not at this point, well over a year, I'd say, of dissatisfaction, low poll numbers, trends that are indicating that things aren't going to go their way in the next election. So if they haven't made up their minds at this point, I don't know what the next few days are necessarily going to do. But the fact that they have actually been able to have the conversation, which so many have said is way too long in coming, the Prime Minister wasn't able to do kind of the divide and conquer that he was able to do after the Toronto-St. Paul's loss. Right. Everybody wanted that meeting and they said no, and he just called everybody up one by one to take this in en masse. I think that's really different, but it doesn't mean that they've actually come to any resolution.
No, it's interesting, and Jonathan, the way this sort of played out is like there was anxiety after Toronto-St. Paul's. George Chahal, who spoke in caucus today about the need for change, and others wrote a letter calling for a caucus meeting. They didn't get it. After Lassalle-Verdun, I'm told a lot of Quebec MPs became alive to what was happening and motivated to push for change. And we know that Sophie Chattel, the Pontiac MP, was part of this effort today. And I, as I understand it, was one of the people getting people to sign the document that we've not seen. Patrick Weiler, who we know signed it, started today by talking about the Biden comparison and the energy that the Democrats got when Joe Biden left and Kamala Harris came in, suggesting maybe that could happen here with the Liberals. Do you think people will buy that argument that just the change at the top, there is polling to show the number of accessible voters in Canada increases if you move on from Justin Trudeau, but there's also the risk that the floor drops out of Liberal support too if the three-term Prime Minister walks away?
I think at the end of the day, most of caucus doesn't believe that. And that's probably the biggest reason why there wasn't a big surge of support for this letter, is that I think the majority of caucus believes that Justin Trudeau is the best person to go into the next campaign with. Doesn't mean they're confident, doesn't mean they're happy with the way things are going, but they look at the alternatives and they're just not convinced the alternatives are any better or would do better. And they also have faith in his ability to campaign. Now, maybe that's naive, maybe that's unrealistic. We see the poll numbers, but we see what's driving them. And at the end of the day, and I don't mean this to pick off individual members of this group that have signed the letter or were orchestrating it, but these are not the most influential members of caucus. These are people who obviously weren't able to convince a big chunk of their colleagues to join. And you've heard that there were actually multiple meetings of small groups of MPs. Yep. It's not even like a united front. And so they took their shot. I don't know what the deadline is next week, what it's going to show. And I don't think that they have some plan for an alternative. And I think that, the Democrats did have a plan for an alternative, number one. And they also had core people, influential people, Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, ultimately calling the leader and saying it's time to go. And so, I like Jordan's reference to the Game of Thrones line, but she said it a bit nicer. No one has to die in this scenario.
Isn't that The Wire? I thought that was Omar Little in The Wire,
Well, in the Game of Thrones, you either win or you die was the line from Cersei. I mean, ultimately, they took their shot. They're going to take another shot next week. And then what happens after that? So I think my sense of hearing from a few people today is they were heard. They took their shot. The Prime Minister is staying as leader, and most people support that. So I sort of, yes, let's wait till next week. But at some point, people are going to either have to decide we're running with him, we're not running again, or we'll sit on our own. Those are the choices. They can't continue every week at caucus to complain. I'll add one quick thing. I think that there needs to be a plan to move forward. I know Andrew Babin was supposed to go to the meeting this morning to present his new campaign director a bit of the plan, there was no time for that because it was focused on this issue. That was important and need to be dealt with. But I think people will also feel better if they feel there's a specific concrete plan. They heard a bit of it in Nanaimo, but nothing happened. I think if they feel there's movement, and if this creates movement, then that's a good start.
Well, part of the problem, Jono, as you would know, they've been told since London it's coming. They were told in Nanaimo it's coming. They were told today it's coming, and it hasn't. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So Gary, Jono makes the point that whoever the Nancy Pelosi of the Liberal Party is was not part of this effort and did not sign this letter. I just wonder, what do you make of the fact that of the 24 names, the letter was read out loud, or what became the final version of the letter? The names were not all presented. The signatures were not all presented. It has been this game of like Clue, of like Ken McDonald in the West Block with a red pen, Patrick Weiler in the Justice Building with a blue pen, figuring out who signed it. But if you're going to force this, you got to stand by it by now, don't you? Like Sean Casey came on this show and said what he said, and then he signed the letter. Absolutely. There's all these others, and we can't get any of them to come on today and talk about why they're doing what they're doing.
Absolutely, and this is what I say. This is the weakest, slowest moving caucus coup in Canadian history. The flip side to that is, in the history of Canadian politics, both at the federal and provincial levels, a lot more damage has been done to leaders by a lot fewer caucus members in the past. I mean, it only took 12 really back in the Reform Alliance days with Stockwell Day. You know, you look at Gordon Campbell.
But on that, just stop on that. Yep. They left caucus and sat as independents. Chuck Strahl and Deb Gray and others. There were 12 of them. The DRC, right? There is no or. That was an or else that they were prepared to. There's no or else.
There's no or else. And at some point, you're going to have to either put up or shut up. But the events of today are basically, the seeds have been sown for 9 years in Justin Trudeau's leadership of the Liberal caucus. You know, you talk about we're coming with the plan. The plan's coming. The dog ate my homework. The plan's coming next week. Well, you know, MPs aren't stupid. They know what's going on. They say, there is no plan. And that's what then starts driving all of these things. They should have had that caucus meeting after the St. Paul's by-election, but they fobbed off some excuse of, oh, logistics, it's too hard to do. Come on. Oh, we don't want to be talking about this over the summer. Well, it's almost November, and we're still talking about it, and you have a caucus coup brewing. So, you know, on and on and on. The seeds have been sown. What the Prime Minister should have done, he should have prorogued Parliament right after the deal with the NDP broke up, said, look, I need a new plan. I'm bringing the House back after Thanksgiving. New throne speech, new plan, new campaign plan. We're ready to go. 3 priorities. Let's go. But there's been none of that. Now they've been using prorogation. They're way too late to the game. Right. His caucus management has been abysmal, and the political malpractice for that lies at the top of the Prime Minister's office and the team around him.
Gary, I have to say, there's a lot of people now talking about prorogation, but they're all conservatives. The Liberals, it's hard to find Liberals talking about it.
They should have done it.
But maybe. But I think it would make them look like they're running from something. And the only scenario in which a lot of people, now maybe it's all changed because of this, that where they would do it is if the Prime Minister was in fact leaving. And then you could have the leadership race and all that. So who knows? They wanted to deliver on pharmacare and all that.
How are they doing?
Well, look, I am just telling you, I'm not advocating it. I am explaining it. I just want to play a clip today of how this all played out today. It made its way into question period to nobody's surprise because awkwardly for Justin Trudeau, it's Wednesday. It's Prime Minister's question day. He takes all the questions, and Pierre Poilievre was right there. Have a listen to this.
Costs up, taxes up, crime's up. And according to 24 Liberal MPs, time is up.
The Liberal Party, as is the Liberal government, totally united on holding the Conservative Party to account.
He cannot fix what he broke because his caucus is revolting.
While the Leader of the Opposition is focused on politics, we're focused on delivering for Canadians the things that matter most.
Will he stop treating his own MPs and Canadians like garbage?
In our caucus, people have always been free to speak their mind and have different perspectives.
So, Jordan, I mean, look, people in the caucus have been free to speak their mind for the past year or so without consequences. There's no question about that. Well, good point. But what a gift to Pierre Poilievre all of this is.
Yeah, I mean, and this is just it, right? So
this deadline on Monday, you know, all of this stuff. The real danger in this is that the bleeding continues over time. Maybe 20 people is not a lot, but it's enough to destabilize on an ongoing basis within that caucus if there's not some form of a resolution to this. And so that, I think, is where the real danger is here. The Prime Minister, as I said elsewhere, I think is extremely likely to survive this week. I think that there's a lot of ways that he can diffuse this and buy a little bit of time. But when there's no solution to the underlying problems, there's no plan to close a 20-point gap. There's no credibility in terms of how they're going to lift his numbers with him as leader to go into the next election. This is going to keep popping up. It's going to be just whack-a-mole all over the place. And that is just deadly because it shows that the government, that the Liberals are not focused on the priorities of Canadians. It allows the Conservatives to have a field day like this. It allows the NDP to come up the middle and claim those issues on affordability, on healthcare, on services that people are really concerned about. And that's what's going to get them in the long run.
Cheryl, what are you watching for next on this? I mean, I know we have this Monday thing, and I don't know if the Prime Minister is going to have a press conference say, I'm not going, and you know, suck it up, Buttercup, and figure out what you're going to do, and then what they might do. I mean, where do you think this goes next?
Well, everybody's always, you know, strong and united until they aren't. You know, every cabinet minister who gets bounced has, you know, the full confidence of the Prime Minister, you know, right up until the day or the hour.
And then they write books. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't really expect to hear, you know, any real signal because things turn on a dime and people play things close to the vest. But until we actually see something happen in terms of, you know, this deadline Monday, or in terms of are the Liberals going to actually make a move to break the stalemate in the House with this privilege debate and show that they are looking to move forward on actually doing the business of governing and saying, hey, we want to do this and this is how we're going to do it. So we're striking a deal with whoever it is we have to get this done and break the privilege debate and see, look, we're leading, we're leaders and people can trust us. I'd say that those would be the signals, but the messaging, I don't expect to offer anything real and concrete.
So Jono, you know, Ken McDonald was here last night, and he mused openly about the idea of voting non-confidence and said other MPs he has had conversation with have mused openly about the idea of voting non-confidence if they don't get the sort of response from the Prime Minister they're looking for. I don't know who these MPs are. I would assume they are people who are not running again. Otherwise, this is a very Thelma and Louise finale kind of sentiment being talked about in caucus. It doesn't take that many. If you get the Bloc, the NDP, you know, like it doesn't take that many Liberals to go, even with one of the other parties staying with you, to put them in this situation. Do you get any sense whatsoever that you could get a Chuck Strahl, Deb Gray type thing where after Monday, if he's sticking around, they're going to go sit as independents, they're going to just go, they're going to resign? What do you think it goes?
I don't know.
Yeah.
A few, like, again, I'm short on names to the extent of the people who signed this and how far were they willing to go. Ken McDonald's been ready to go. I'm sure Wayne Long would join him. And the attitude the Prime Minister needs to be, this is my suggestion, is go ahead. At some point, you have to say, you don't have confidence in me, do what you need to do, but I'm going to continue to govern. I'm going to continue to lead this party, and you have a choice to make. Because the in-between, this slow drip we've been talking about, isn't going to work for anybody. And so they need to decide, especially those who aren't running again. If you're not running again, you can sit in the corner and be quiet, or you can bring down a government and walk away with that as your record. I don't think most of them are willing to do that. Maybe a few of them will. But, you know, there is a difference from those who got up and said, I have concerns about your leadership. I think you should think about leaving. And those who are willing to bring down the entire government. That, to me, that's a huge step forward. I would be very surprised if that were to happen. I'm not daring anyone to do something like that. I'd be surprised. I think we're going to limp in the next 2 weeks. Next week will be another dramatic week with deadlines that are supposedly coming. The Bloc's deadline, some of these caucus members' deadline. The week after that's the U.S. election. A lot of stuff is going on. You have a break week after that. Prime Ministerial travel is planned. The APEC conference.
Jono, should he do that?
I don't know. Well, but if those trips get canceled, what does that tell us? If those trips go on, what does that tell us? That's what I'm looking for over the next week and a half, 2 weeks, but the American election is going to suck out a lot of oxygen. And then also the idea of a cabinet shuffle. Where does that fit into all of this? And are there a few members who are a little pissy, but maybe they'll stick around because maybe they'll get elevated?
Yes, that is something that people have talked about. But if you believe that the Prime Minister will stick with his gender-balanced cabinet, and if you accept the posture put out there by people that most of these dissidents are men, there aren't enough spaces there to calm the waters that much, right? And Gary, it seems to me with the way the 24 seem to be still talking and the way some of the Prime Minister's supporters are still talking, is that the end game for each is almost like a Pyrrhic victory, where they're both so damaged at the end of this that nobody will really be able to claim victory, and it's a self-fulfilled sort of defeat potentially for all of them.
Well, absolutely. I mean, if the Liberal Party, either the members of the Gang of 24 or the rest of the caucus, if their worst nightmare is a Pierre Poilievre election, well, guess what? This is all continuing to help Pierre Poilievre's narrative to win the next election. That's why Mr. Poilievre will be happy to take shots at the Liberal caucus and the Prime Minister going forward, as he did today in Parliament. Like this is tailor-made for him. Look, at the end of the day, they need to resolve this sooner rather than later, or it's going to continue on. It's right. We don't know exactly what the end game is going to be here, because at some point the 24 have to put up or shut up. But the counterpoint to that is, Jonathan talked about, well, some of these people aren't influential, and I said earlier about numbers. That line can also turn out very badly, where somebody who signed the letter who might not be in the in crowd or in the inner circle goes, oh yeah. Well, guess what? You're in a minority parliament. You need my vote, you need his vote, you need her vote. Well, we're going out, and we're not influential. Well, look how influential we are now.
Well, yeah, on that point, I mean, Jordan, we've only got a couple of minutes left. I might even Sherelle in. There has been some pushback from people around the Prime Minister that, well, these are not the heavyweights of caucus, but fine. But, a caucus is a lot of people.
Caucus members with not a lot to lose can be very dangerous.
Absolutely.
They can be very dangerous to a weak leader. And that's the moment that the Liberals are living right now. This is not a government that appears to be in any way connected to the concerns of Canadians. This is a government reinforcing the very worst narratives of being self-involved and out of touch. And it is leaving the door wide open for the Conservatives and the NDP to take up that space.
Sherelle, what do you think?
There's only so far you can coast on kind of a nothing to see here type of game that you're playing, the don't look, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. They're desperately trying to pull these curtains down. So they need to have something in place to allay all of these fears. And I don't know, from everything that we've seen so far, if they have the necessary structure, because they have a very long-serving chief of staff. You have a new campaign director who's not exactly a fresh face, fresh voice in terms of the Liberal Party. There isn't a lot of outside new influence. So anybody who's looking for change, I think they're going to be a little disappointed.
Are you surprised we didn't hear from the Prime Minister today beyond sort of the strut out of the caucus room and up to his office saying the Liberal Party is united? I mean, they have this immigration announcement coming tomorrow where they're going to announce a big cut to immigration numbers, reducing permanent residence numbers and resident numbers and all of that. They want that to be the centerpiece, and he's going to get a million questions about this, right? It feels like we heard nothing from the Prime Minister today, and a lot of cabinet ministers saying kind of what they've been saying in the days leading up to this. Are you surprised by that?
Yeah, a little, because, I mean, I say a little, but not very, because this is kind of the MO, right? It's project.
But that's my point. Take forever to respond to something,
Take forever to respond,
right?
project a whatever face that you want to put out there. And now he's going to have to, as Jordan's saying, it's going to be the whack-a-mole. We will never be able to get past what it is that what's going on behind those closed doors, because everybody's going to be asking about this.
Okay, John, last 30 seconds to you on that. As someone who's worked for the Prime Minister and worked in the office, are you surprised we didn't hear from him today beyond the soundbite as he sort of breezed by and went upstairs? I know he took questions at question period where we went at Poilievre, but do you think he should have addressed this in a more substantive way?
Kind of lose-lose, because if he comes out and gives it too much oxygen, or at least from his perception, gives it too much attention, then he's giving it too much attention, and maybe it festers even longer. How many people in Canada who don't sit and watch the news all day are really aware of all these details? I don't know. So maybe that was his fear. But, tomorrow he's going to come out and have to answer it anyways. And The message he wants to send is, I'm governing. I'm making changes to immigration because those things need to happen. I have plans. I'm moving forward. People are obstructing. That's what they're doing. That's the message he's trying to deliver. If it's getting through, why I said it's lose-lose, because if he addresses all these issues, he's not addressing governing, day-to-day Canadian needs. So
yeah,
but to that point, crisis management 101, go to where you're going to end up. Like, by not going there, you continue to drag out the problem over and over and over again. And I don't think he did himself any favors today.
But if you end the caucus meeting looking at everybody and saying, I'm going to take this to heart and reflect on it, but I still think I'm the right person to lead, he can stop at the pool mics and say, I heard a lot of difficult truths in there. I'm going to listen to them. I still think I'm the right person, and we're going to find a way to move forward together. That fills that demand for a response that he's going to be.
We're not going to stop asking.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think there's any universe in which the
I do not understand their strategy at all.
Fair enough, but
about it tomorrow.
I know. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll probably talk about it again tomorrow too. But we're done talking about it for now. At least the five of us are. And I loved every minute. Thank you so much, Sherelle Evelyn, Gary Keller, Jordan Leichnitz, Jonathan Kalis. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it.